All right. Good morning, Commissioner. It is now June 14th. We are halfway through the month, and once again, we're here to film our weekly video for the staff. How's everything for you?
Yep. I mean, think back to March 13th and some of those first weeks of uncertainty. We are now entering our fourth month of the unpredictable nature of this pandemic, and we're going strong. We've got some tremendous leadership across the department taking us into yet another month of pandemic land, I guess we call it.
Mm-hmm. And this month, and there's two actually nationally celebrated points for the month of June, one of which you want to talk about today, which is National Pride Month.
Yeah, treating others with dignity and respect has been a constant theme in these weekly messages. And more so recently, and really thinking about our personal worldviews and how we've developed our own identities. And I'm excited every year that, I didn't realize that this is the 50th anniversary of organized pride traditions. And in June 2020 we have to think about what's at the center of all the LGBTQ movements across the country, as we stamp out negative stigma and allow people to live with inclusion and acceptance in their daily lives, and particularly those that work for and with us across DCF. And so, yeah, we wanted to highlight that June being Pride Month this year in 2020, it's particularly significant in the climate that we're in, but also in the demarcation of that 50 years of really, standing up and making sure that all voices are heard.
Mm-hmm. And as we are celebrating Pride Month, certainly you have talked in the previous two weekly videos about protests that are happening across the country in response to the murder of George Floyd. There's a greater message, I think, as well, that you want to confirm with our staff about organizing and expressing their beliefs and taking part in protests as it relates to use of state equipment and state time. Can you delve into that a little bit?
Yeah, as we think about Pride Month and we think about what really started off as the opportunity for people's voices to be heard, I used to in the classroom talk about the Stonewall Uprising and what happened when there was a pretty significant confrontation that sparked what I considered to be the strongest movement to help kind of lend voice and lend the global awareness of LGBT pride and, just how we interface with each other. And, when you think back to Stonewall and you think back to that particular uprising and the protests and rallies that followed, and then that kind of spawned what we now know today as pride rallies and pride parades. And, you want to make sure that people have a safe place to express themselves. And I think that also fits nicely into where we are today. As we think about racial unrest and racial justice and kind of institutional issues that we find ourselves grappling with here at DCF, we have to remind ourselves that when we do so, when we participate in rallies or protests or marches, that we do so on our state time, and that, we are not allowed to use state equipment to be able to do that. I know it's tempting because we're in a virtual environment and sometimes it's easier to reach out to folks that way, but you can't do so over state email. You have to do that with your personal equipment. And, again, in the coming weeks, we will have, I referenced last week, that safe and sound model and framework of how we at DCF will, approach this whole topic about, creating a safe environment and creating the culture that results in what we need for kids and families in our workforce. But just a reminder, as we think about how we reflect and how we participate in the broader sense, that, we need to do that on our own time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, we have yet another big week. Seems like we say that every week. We have another big week coming up in the department, which indicates on Wednesday, phase 2 of Reopen Connecticut is going to be put into place. But even before then, effective tomorrow, we are going to resume visits between children in our care and their parents under some limited criteria, along with confirmation via the triage process. Can you talk a little bit about the triage process, both for kids in care and how we are continuing that process for investigations and in-home families?
Yep. So let's do the visitation changes that'll happen that are effective tomorrow. Some of those are just our opportunity to put our toe in the water, because we do know that, science is dictating, the data is dictating, and are, listening to what DPH and CDC are telling us about the transmission rates of this virus, and we want to be extra careful. But we also want to recognize that although we believe that virtual contact still needs to be the preferred method and it needs to be happening regularly and often, we recognize that some physical contact and in-person contact between parents and their kids will be warranted, and that we're allowing for such. So we know that both the Solnuts and our congregate community facilities that have kids committed to them have been developing and crafting their own relaxation of the visitation restrictions that we put in place. And so both Solnuts will be releasing that probably sometime this week as to what their plans are around allowing in-person visits on their campuses. The other thing we decided to add is that, if you have cases of kids on your caseload that are close to reunification, so within that kind of 3-month time period, you want to target those families to maybe increase your virtual visits and then allow for a visitation triage to occur that might warrant an in-person visit. And then we want to look at babies, those kids under 6 months of age who were removed probably during this time. There may be an opportunity to do a visitation triage that allows for an in-person visit in that way. We want to make sure that everyone that's involved in this visitation process is safe, and we want to test out some of the things that we know we need to do as a department related to making sure that these can happen in a way that doesn't increase our footprint in transmission. Later on in the video, when we talk about the data or the statistics for our department, we'll see that a lot of these efforts to be cautious have paid off for us.
Yeah, they have. And
I'll say, so do you want to move into the triaging of in-home and investigations, or?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So what we have, I was so pleasantly surprised last week when we were talking to our bureau chief of child welfare and the assistant chiefs. They had just had a Teams meeting with our investigations leads, and I was really pleased at the quality of the work that I knew our staff were doing. I knew just based on how I know our work, that people would rise to the occasion, and this has been no exception. The triage process has been successful in that, they've had this process in place now for several weeks, or actually several months, in which cases are determined after a conversation between folks in the chain of command with those at Caroline who took the report to determine when there is a need for an in-person assessment. We have been conducting those. We all don't have to tell us that we never shut. We never, there's no reopen for TCF,
right,
because
we've always been open.
We've been open. Yeah. So our resuming full functioning efforts really look critically at these processes that we've had in place that allow for critical discussions about cases to determine where indeed an in-person visit to an in-home or an in-person investigation is warranted. And that's been happening, and people have been doing so very successfully. And I've seen some wonderful narratives, timely written, detailed narratives of contacts and assessments and engagements that are happening in the virtual world. So we're doing it, you guys. We, our providers and our staff have, kept their finger on the pulse of our families. And, we just want to continue to make sure that we do that in a safe way.
And that triage process it includes worker soup, program supervisor, all the way up to office director and others. So it's a comprehensive look at the case, safety factors, safety of the staff, which certainly is paying off. And that triage process and visitation are topics that over this past week were brought into a greater conversation when we received feedback from youth, families, providers, and community partners about resuming full operations. And there were staff, certainly my staff included, that took in input and feedback from different groups across the state. And we presented those to senior leadership and Commissioner Yu and the executive team. Can you advise the staff a little bit about some of the things that we heard?
So yeah, what's been fantastic is everything that we've gotten through our COVID-19 mailbox, everything that we've gotten through our 4 work groups from internal folks across the department. We know that there was an excitement to give information and to be a part of these processes, and you all did not disappoint. People sent in recommendations through a lot of areas, a lot of different ways. And we were able to craft some of these processes that I'm talking about, like the visitation one and the triaging, with those suggestions. And so we extended that to do these external stakeholder feedback groups. And we've been able to get some really good feedback from our state advisory council. We've gotten feedback from our parent advocacy groups like Favor and AFCAMP.
Yeah.
We've gotten feedback from teenagers and youth. We've gotten feedback from legislators. We've gotten feedback from some of our legal partners as we try to figure out how this whole delay in court operations is impacting how we do our work towards permanency. And so all of these groups did I cover all of them? Yeah, I think all of these groups coming together to offer suggestions and ways that we can safely resume. We got feedback from the Foster Parent Association,
Yep.
How we can resume full functioning step by step by step. Our providers are providing us input through some organized trade organizations like the Alliance, and through Clock. They're giving us feedback as to what they think they need. And then we have also organized a group to get some provider feedback with our program leads and our systems development folks here. We have also identified that our systems leads will kind of take the hub of really taking all of this information that we got from all of the internal feedback and external feedback and putting it together into a template to offer to the governor's office through the Department of Administrative Services and OLR, Office of Labor Relations, to kind of craft what the DCF picture will look like on as we resume full functioning. So Elizabeth Duryea and the systems PDs will be kind of leading and heading up that effort to pull all of this information and all of the recommendations together. So you're right, we're getting information from so many different sources, and it's great.
And Commissioner, I can also tell you that even up through this weekend, we've continued to receive input and feedback from DCF staff to the COVID-19 mailbox.
Yeah.
So just to confirm, receiving information is an ongoing process. There is no end date.
Right.
The work evolves as science evolves, as we take those little steps to getting back to what we call resuming full operations. The nature of the work and information that we know may change. So let's continue to be open with all those groups you mentioned, especially our internal staff, to express what they see, thoughts, best case practice moving forward. And it's hopefully by the end of this week, speaking of best case practice, we're going to send out our monthly Spotlight on What's Right newsletter, highlighting some really great things that staff have done around the state who have really gone above and beyond in their role as DCF staff. So we always look forward to putting that out and having staff read that. And it's also a good reminder that we want to capture those, positive stories that are out there and bring them to folks' attention. So
yeah, you know what? Everybody that has been continuing to work, whether virtually or in person throughout the department, is above and beyond over the last 3 months, because, we really have had to, we've heard the phrase, write the playbook as we go along, and we have some tremendously committed people across the department that have been doing just that.
Yeah. So you're starting to pause a little bit on the screen, which is getting me worried about the technical aspects of the video, which is a great segue to, at this point, you typically give staff on a statewide basis statistics and give folks the opportunity to stop the video if they would like. So I think it sounds like it's perfect timing for that segment.
Right. As we enter into Pride Month, we want to make sure that we continue to understand each other, to empathize with each other, and to be authentic with each other as we respect everyone's basic rights to who they are and to how they live in this world and what our contributions as a department is. And so as we end this week's video on those words that we have been using to punctuate how we as a department will move forward, we will give this as the opportunity for folks to log off so we can give the data for the week.
Great.
And so, Ken, I'm excited that the data for the week has shown that we're holding steady.
Yeah.
All of these efforts that we have made to really minimize the department's footprint on transmission seem to have been paying off. We know that, some of our staff have had some tremendous losses to COVID-19, and, our heart continues to mourn and grieve with them as they have from the beginning. But what we're starting to see right now is a leveling off of some of the data that we've been sharing. So we are right now at 64 foster parents holding steady, with 40 of those being core and 24 being TFC foster parents. We've had 15 kids in our care test positive, and we're continuing to watch closely our medical division to make sure that the multi-symptom syndrome that is plaguing some kids after having a COVID positive test is continuing to be monitored. We've had no kids diagnosed with that. And then we've had 34 staff members test positive, with 30 returning to work. We're getting some good feedback about people's recovery and their ability to kind of get healthy again after being sidelined with this disease. We also recognize that as we stood up more mass testing of asymptomatic staff, we were paying attention to see if we would have lots of asymptomatic people testing positive, and that hasn't been the case.
Yep.
And so we continue to make staff aware of where those testing sites are. So you can kind of have a baseline to know what your status is as a direct care or a public facing staff member to be tested if you so choose. And we're excited that a lot of our staff members have taken advantage of the opportunity to do that. I think the 16th is the next date that's being offered at Solent North, but there's various sites across the state that have been contracted to allow for DCF staff who have direct care responsibility and public facing roles within level 1 to be tested.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's good news. We're holding steady, but again, be vigilant, be cautious. We have a big week ahead with opening up more visitation and contact between parents and children. Commissioner, we hope you have a great week, and I think we will all get back together in what appears to be a short time.
Yeah, right. Have a good weekend. We'll talk to you later on today, probably for another meeting. And then again, obviously, as we jump into the week next week, we're excited to continue to give the department updates in this format.
You bet. Take care.
All right. Take care.